for the opportunity. Thanks for coming. Hopefully by the end of the hour, you'll realize that I have a passion for safety. It's something I've been doing for about 20 years now. I've been in the field and I've had a wide range of experiences. All have led me to Mobile Mini. I've been here for about 5.5 years, and it's been an interesting ride. We've learned a lot. We've come a long way as an organization, but we still have ways to go. Today I'm going to really be talking about 3 things, 2 of which are on the slide. But I want to define really what's safety culture. I know we have some sales folks, we have some business folks in here, but how can we help to sell the safety culture? It is something that is more of a buzzword, but it is where industry is going, particularly really the big boys of the world, the oil companies and the large retailers. How does the human element play into safety? Why do we want to work safe? Ultimately, what is the reason why we should? And then last is, if we have a poor safety record as a company, what does that mean? Quick summary, none of us will be here. We really won't have a job, because no one's really going to want to hire Mobile Mini. But to start out, I'd like to start out with what is my safety why. These are 3 specific pictures of my family and or my kids. Off to the left is my oldest son, Jackson. He's in the middle of the ocean serving a mission for our church. He's been there for about 10 months. Got to talk to him a few times. He's learning incredible things. He is part of my safety why. The middle picture is the rest of my family, my wife, my daughter, and my other son. That is at her dance recital. She got chosen to dance in New York City, part of a large ballet company here in the Valley. She is quite the talent. And then last is my middle son, Layton, who is quite the car guy. We got to go to Barry Jackson's a couple of months ago when that came to town in January. What I hope to instill in each of you and ask yourself, what is your safety why? Why do you want to work safe? Perhaps it's a hobby. Perhaps it's family. Perhaps it's an activity. You name it. There's 1,000 different reasons. There's no one answer that's bigger or better than the other. Ultimately, for us to all realize that, the human element to safety really should be the biggest and best reason why we as a company ultimately want to work safe. So I challenge each of you, at the next opportunity that safety comes up, whether that be at home, whether that be here at work, or particularly in your case, you being a supervisor or a lead, you tell your safety why. Create one simple slide. It's easy. You could probably come up with 50 different reasons why you want to work safe. For me, that's what my life is really all about once I go home. So shifting gears to when we talk about safety first, it's got to be something we think about every day. Let's take the office environment that all of us really are clearly in, and we look at the branch. I know many of you have been to the branch. Actually, with Christine and a few others, we went a couple of weeks ago. You know, we have forklifts and we're lifting heavy boxes and heavy pieces of machinery. Some pretty serious things can happen at a branch. Here in the office, we have just as serious things that can happen. They're different, but clearly injuries can happen. And so it's got to be something that we really think about and we're committed to every single day. How do we know when we've reached safety first? How do we know we reach safety first? At the end of the day, we can say, you know what? I don't feel that I had an incident. I don't feel like I had anything that happened. Certainly I didn't get injured. Certainly we didn't have any level of an accident if I'm out to lunch during my vehicle out at lunch. But it really takes that individual commitment and ultimately that personal responsibility day in and day out. As I mentioned, in a branch it's going to have much bigger impact for an individual who's using an angle grinder or using a forklift. Does it just to apply to an individual at the branch or a yard worker or a driver? Clearly it doesn't. And often we're asked for statistics of an entire company. And our work here in the office clearly counts for that. For the branches, we're trying to really improve day after day. In the beginning, I said we've come a long way, and we have. We've learned a lot of things. Sometimes we've learned through I guess what could be called the school of hard knocks, where hey, something happens, let's make sure we instill a program, a policy, a training program, really based around that one thing. Does anyone know the last injury we suffered here in the office? It was a few months ago. I'm sure there have been a few minor paper cuts and such that I guess we could count those as an injury, but the last injury I'm aware of, someone tripped over an open drawer in their desk. And again, you don't want to laugh at that. It may seem that it's trivial, or it may seem that it's, I don't know, almost silly, but it happens. And we'll highlight that here in just a moment. But if we as a company want to get to what Kelly described as Mobile Money 3.0 or Safety 3.0, yeah, we need to really strive for world-class safety performance. I touched on this. Why does safety matter to you? And each of you are going to have probably a different reason or a different story. But I want you to think throughout this presentation, what is your safety why? And why is it important to you? Because clearly for all of us, that's our main and our biggest goal each and every day is we all go home safe. So when it comes to safety, we look at lagging indicators. And clearly it's always part of what, my boss Chris always talks about as part of what Kelly certainly stresses. As if any of you have joined the financial call every month, this is the first topic of the call. And that really is on purpose. But if you look about our injuries, there on the top left slide, our recordable injury rate was a 1.61. That means that for every 100 employees, about 1.5 employees are hurt. Is that good or is that bad? Well, you can see we were at 0.59 at the end of 2017. So 2018, yeah, it was kind of a rough year. We had some struggles, and we learned some things. This year, halfway through the year, we're at that same rate. We haven't gone down. We've had less number of injuries, but we're on the same path, same target to equal last year's total. Not great, but hopefully we can catch that up by minimizing those injuries going forward. When you look at the upper right corner under the OSHA recordable injuries, these are our preventable injuries. We've had 12 this year, meaning there were 12 preventable injuries that happened that we should have had some prevention measure in place, but ultimately we didn't. I'll talk about what each of those here in just a moment. The lower left are our DOT violations. We track those. Clearly impacts just our drivers. But as drivers go out on the road and they maybe do anything and everything from speeding to not using a turn signal to not having a load secured, an officer sees that, he's going to pull over our drivers, and we're ultimately going to get a ticket. And it's going to impact our company rating. It's going to impact our company score, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. You can see that the top left, top right, and bottom left, that arrow is literally, it's yellow on purpose, really as it's flat, meaning we have not improved. So we haven't achieved what may be deemed as world-class performance. We're striving for it, but we're not there yet. When we look at the collisions, we are down based on year-over-year performance last year to this year, which is good. Again, when we define a collision as, if we're loading or unloading something, our vehicle is driving, that's a collision. It just doesn't happen on the roadway. We've had a fair number of those, unfortunately. Many of them have been not preventable, meaning it's not our fault, but a number of them have been. And they've been everything from distracted to I just didn't see the car. So again, is that world-class performance? We're not there yet. We still have a place to go. And so it's all about our safety commitment. We talk about it being a value and not necessarily a priority. How many of you make a priority list every single day? I do. I make a list of things that I either forgot yesterday or I need to do today. Well, what happens? You get an email, you get a call, you get another email. By the time you turn around, you're 50 emails deep. You haven't even looked at your list. And so I literally folded up my list from yesterday. I did one thing off my list, and I threw it on my desk because I need to get back to that today. Well, I've been doing graphs and a few things that actually John's helping me do, and I haven't got to my list yet. And so that's what happens ultimately with priorities, is they get shifted around, and it really is who's screaming the loudest. But do our values, if we really have a value in safety, does that change? If you have a value system, it shouldn't. It's going to take a major life-changing event for a value to change. But generally, if we have a belief or a true ingrained value, it's not going to change day to day. It truly is not. And really, safety is not about being an expert in anything and everything. It's really about having the integrity, really, that we demonstrate that integrity with what we know. And if we don't know, ask. We had an injury just a couple of days ago in which a driver was struggling with the door. It was super hard to open, really the handle of a door. And as he was using a little extra might, he ultimately pulled the handle. His hand slipped off the handle, and he fell against the container, ultimately bruising some ribs or his chest. And so we're working through that investigation, working through the kind of the lessons learned of ultimately what happened. Don't know exactly why it happened, but we need to learn from that. And so at that point should that have been a moment where that driver simply raised his hand and says, hey, stop, I can't get the door open, it's too hard for me, or maybe made a phone call, maybe there could have been someone else to help him, maybe another driver could have stopped by. I don't know all the answers yet, but those are some of the things we're working to. So it's about us as a company, us as individuals, really demonstrating the integrity towards safety with what we have. Do we as a company have the mindset that one injury is too many, or that one injury is preventable? If we don't, we ought to. I think sometimes we may believe that, oh, that happens at the branch. It's okay. He's worried of an injury because it's hot. They're sweating. They're working with power tools. They're up at heights. They're working with big machinery. And it's almost that it's more accepted in the field. And I suppose that was probably so 1985. But in where we're trying to go, clearly we need to have the belief that one injury is too many, and really everything is preventable. And then look at the last bullet point. Do we have a belief that if we see somebody doing something unsafe, will we speak up, or we'll just simply, I didn't see that today. I don't want to deal with it, so I'm just going to turn my head. I'm going to pretend I didn't see that. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm really going to walk on by. I think by and large, an injury probably won't happen. An incident may not happen, but really the one time it does, it will. I go back to the drawer injury I told you from a few months ago. Unfortunately, that individual didn't get hurt terribly bad. A little bit of pain, a little bit of embarrassment, admittedly, but ultimately there wasn't a terrible injury, fortunately. But I wonder how many people saw that drawer open. May not have, they may have. I know recently I've closed a few of them. We go into our drawer, we start working, we leave it open, we go back to our email. 10 minutes later, it's still open. You quickly got to get up to go do something, and you, again, head over heels. What I like is safety leadership, and we all can exhibit safety leadership, but it really is, it's a people business. We're trying to lead people. We're trying to be that example of everyone. If you have, let's take a yard worker who is out, as I mentioned, using power tools out in the heat, and if they see something, the impact they can have in the branch yard, as I mentioned, there's probably going to be a little bit more of a serious injury that might happen. But having us to really step up and speak up and say something. I don't know if all of us will, but I challenge you to do so. What I'm hoping, I hope to pass along a few things to many of us. But if someone, it's been a couple of years ago, but someone called my desk phone and said, hey, why don't you step up and why don't you look down the hallway? Someone is standing on a chair trying to reach, they were trying to put something on the wall. And I was more than happy to deal with it. More than happy to go down and let's talk to the individual. Hey, here's why we don't stand on a chair. So not only were they standing on a chair, but the chair was, it spins, much like this style, and the chair was on wheels. So there was really a trifecta of things, but by and large, a chair isn't the right piece of equipment we should be standing on. So I went over and we really explained that. We got him down. We got a ladder, a much more appropriate tool. But the hopes is, well, why did that individual, why didn't they ultimately take the opportunity to confront? Might be a strong word, but it's professionally, it's mentor. Less of confrontation, but more of mentoring. Going back to the value versus a priority. So we know that if we have a value, it's not going to easily change unless there were a life-changing event. Some people have almost a spiritual awakening if there was a pretty serious medical challenge that happens. And those are reported across the board. It doesn't matter where we sit, but I think that's commonly reported. We also know that the value system, it's not readily influenced by others, at least not easily. Versus you look at the priority list, those often do change very, very frequently. And so recognizing the difference, there may not seem like there's a major difference, but if we look at it in that light, I think we'll see that. That was a little bit on kind of the safety, my safety why. And ultimately the building blocks of kind of where I'm going to go here for the remaining 35, 40 minutes we have left. If we look at this slide, clearly safety and health there in the center, if we can certainly set ourselves apart in an operational excellence, if we are hitting on all cylinders regarding safety and health. So let's take the first. Do we believe that we can have improved productivity if we're behaving safely? And how come? Tell me why.
Because it's like the circle of life. If mom's happy, the whole family's happy. So if you're happy, you put out happiness and everyone's happy around you. Morale is up.
Love it. Has anyone been at a company in which a very serious injury has happened? Has anyone worked at a company prior to Mobile Mini that you were at in which a very serious injury happened? Years ago, I worked here in Arizona. I was an OSHA inspector. It was my job to go out and find the problems that a company didn't fix and ultimately issue citations. In my tenure with Arizona OSHA, I investigated 5 occupational fatalities. And I left there in 2005. No, 2001. I left there in 2001. So it's been a while. But in my 5 years that I worked there, I learned some pretty valuable lessons. And in those 5 fatalities that I was investigating to figure out what happened, when you talk about morale, OSHA shows up. Everyone has this thought about the OSHA is going to shut us down and they're going to close the door and they're going to lock us all in a room and really figure out ultimately what happened. Well, that's not the goal. But morale-wise, it's absolutely what happens. But more importantly and more critically, you think about the life of the individual that ultimately was lost. And in each of those injuries, here was the main theme. That was the main theme that I learned. Every single one of them was preventable. Plain and simple, preventable. They just were not foreseeable for some reason. But when we looked at improved productivity, absolutely. Usually, projects or branches or work groups who are behind schedule, who are over budget, they're probably going to have poor safety records. And I think that speaks a little bit to the productivity. What about cost and risk reduction? Does anyone know what the average slip, trip, and fall costs? Not necessarily Mobile Mini, but just in industry in general. Anyone know? About $15,000. So for those of you in sales, how many containers does that take to make up that $15,000? There's no one's going to pay that but Mobile Mini. And so when you look at that dollar value, you can start adding them up. Well, if we've had 12 preventable recordable injuries, not saying every one was $15,000, but you're now over $100,000 just in injury costs. That doesn't account for the accidents, doesn't account for the tickets, doesn't account for any of those other challenges that happen. So we start talking about cost, and that certainly adds up. Fortunately, our injury rating, fortunately our injury costs, we're taking definitely a steep dive downward over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's been positive. So it's only one element of some of the things we look at, but it's been a positive outcome of where we're really trying to go. What would it do? Let's take those 5 companies that suffered that fatality I spoke of earlier. What would that do reputation-wise to that company? What would it do to Mobile Mini if we were to have a fatality? Clearly, yes, there's a human element, and that's where we need to focus first. But once we take care of that and we set that aside, what happens now when we have to report statistics to large companies? We now have to report that we've experienced a fatality. What does that do to the branch? What does that do to the region, division, North America, even for our customers? I think we all agree we'd probably much rather be known for a stupendous safety record rather than ultimately a major injury. I think that speaks as well to our ability to compete. As I mentioned earlier, your large oil companies, large oil companies, large refineries, large retail locations, the first question we're asked is, what is your safety record? What's been happening the last 12 months? What's been happening the last 3 years in certain key safety categories? And when we have to report, well, we've had this serious injury and this happened, they're going to start asking questions. And if we have a workers' compensation rate in one of our divisions that's over 1.0, that is a no-brainer. They're simply not going to hire us. And we've had a few that have said, we're not going to hire you. So when we might think that, well, it's just a simple slip and trip down 2 stairs and I hurt a knee and then I just got to go to the doctor and it's just a small prescription. That's one of the things that we're trying to not only avoid the slip, trip, and fall, but downstream, hey, if it progresses to where we think it's going to go, that may have an impact really business-wise. I talked about access to large customers. Well, when we look at the Shells and the BPs and the big oil companies, they don't want to have companies who may suffer an injury on their site. They're large enough and they're going to be able to pick really the cream of the crop. So when you look at safety and health well-rounded, those are not all, but some of the major operational things that can set us apart if we really have our safety house in order. Any questions, thoughts?
Is there like a public record that other companies can see how much like injuries we've had? Is there something out there? Like, how do they know that we had so many injuries?
Well, there's two. I'll answer that in 2 ways. If OSHA has been to your site and they've done an inspection, there's a public record. They can see how many citations have been issued, how many violations. So if OSHA is a frequent visitor to any one of our branches or any location, and you've had a number of violations, companies, that's another KPI that they're going to look at. So that's kind of one avenue. How does OSHA show up to your site? Well, they're going to show up based on an employee complaint. They're going to show up based on a pretty serious accident. Fatality would fit that bill. They're going to show up based on a large number of workers' compensation claims. Those are probably the 3 biggest reasons why they ultimately would show up to your site. So that's one way. The other way is when we bid for work, when we talk about access to large customers, we have to tell them how many injuries we've had. They want to see our OSHA, what's called an OSHA 300 log. We tell them, can't lie, we got to be open. And that's how they find out. So they may ask more questions. Does that answer your question? Any other thoughts? Any other questions? So I've talked a little about recordable injuries. Well, it's just a small knee injury. Just go to the doctor, it's okay, just get a small prescription. Well, recordable injuries matter. Yes, it's lagging. Yes, it happened so yesterday or so last week. We can't really do anything to influence the outcome of that recordable injury. We can only really go forward. And that's ultimately, as a company, where we're trying to go with leading. About getting our KPIs tracking leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. And some of the leading indicators that we're really starting to track and publicize are things like how many coaching events happen between a supervisor and the employee. How many safety safeguard observations have happened between the supervisor or the manager and the employee. Where those, we have the opportunity to really influence the outcome. If one of our managers sees somebody standing on the top step of a ladder and they have that engagement, that interaction, we have likely stopped an incident from happening. Now who knows, they may never have fallen off a ladder, but if that is allowed to persist, whether it be in Miami or in Rialto or in Dallas or in Seattle or wherever across the U.S., one of these points it's going to get us, and we'll talk about that. I did allude to the fact of here. So those poor recordable scores may be a trigger and reason why OSHA ultimately shows up. Again, we certainly don't want that. If you look at our premium impact, well, our workers' comp, our insurance company, if they got to pay hundreds and thousands of injuries, they're probably going to want to recoup more of their money every month to ensure that that they can still make money. Why would we want to pay more insurance or more premiums? That's just more money, more sales that ultimately has to happen. Fortunately, as I mentioned, our rates are coming down over the last 3 or 4 years, and pretty dramatically. It's been, we had a long way to go at the very beginning, and we've made up for that. When we try to attract top talent or top people to an organization and they recognize what our safety record is, you think they would want to come join us? They want to come stay? They might not, and certainly it's one angle that we look at. And as I mentioned, the vendor profile, those companies can, and they'll ask us on our safety record. So if you look at here in the office and across the board, our biggest injury opportunity is slip, trip, and fall. It's a simple slip, trip, and fall. There is no elevation involved. We're not up on a ladder. We're not up on top of a container. Fortunately, we haven't had a major slip, trip, and fall here in this office for, I believe it was like 630 some days ago, roughly. But when you look at across the board, 30% of our total injuries this year, 12 out of 40, slip, trip, and fall. Here are just 3 of them. Unfortunately, 2 of the recordable injury we suffered this year was two separate individuals, months apart, were ultimately walking backwards and both tripped over a railroad tie. And I think that's the initial reaction is, why would you be walking backwards? Well, they're so focused on their task. Our biggest opportunity to avoid a slip, trip, and fall is just keep your eyes focused on where you're walking. What's the biggest culprit of, just in industry in general, of a slip, trip, and fall? The blasted cell phone. We literally we're walking when we're reading, or we're going down the stairs and we're looking at a cell phone. It may not get you today, it may not get you tomorrow, but I guarantee you it's going to get somebody if that allows to come up. A couple of weeks ago, I was going down right behind somebody, and I said something. You want to be on your cell phone walking down the stairs? Of course, he put it in his pocket and he continued down. I said, hey, thanks, I'll make sure I stop that. So I encourage you, have those moments you just speak up. Because when we don't have our eyes on path, that is one item that really starts the ball rolling downhill of a slip, trip, or fall opportunity. If you look at in 2013 across all of industry, Department of Labor reports that there were 230,000 cases in the U.S. of people having an injury. How many of us could afford to be out of work for 2 months? Nobody's working because they just want it. It's a cool thing to just want to work. We're all here because we need a paycheck, right? Of course, we love the place we work. We like what we do. We like our coworkers, I'm sure. Most of them, right? But we all ultimately, we're here because we need a paycheck. If you're out, if you don't get a paycheck coming in for a month, what's that going to do? Could that be part of your safety why? Hopefully it is. I'm sure it's part of mine. I think about it often. Could my family survive if I'm not working for a period of 3 or 4 or 5 months? Yeah, likely not. And I wonder if we're all in a very similar boat. Let me define. I threw out the term recordable injury. Does anyone know what that means?
Is that an injury that's recorded and put on paper?
Okay. Kind of. At the 50,000 foot level, it's a great definition. Well, a recordable injury, OSHA has defined, it's an OSHA definition. It's not Sean's definition, it's an OSHA definition. That says there are 14 things that if a doctor, nurse, physician's assistant, paramedic, EMT, whoever, if they do anything more than those 14 specific things, it's going to be defined as an OSHA recordable case. So let's define recordable. It's easier to define recordable by defining what is a first aid. OSHA's defined a first aid with 14 specific things. Things like putting ice on a wound, washing it with water, putting a Band-Aid, using a soft sling, drinking water for heat stress. Those are examples of first aid injuries. If anything above those 14 things are done by a medical professional, then it's ultimately defined as a recordable injury. So then, to your question, that's when we have to tell companies that something has happened. So how do we manage that? If any of you have not heard, I know there are signs everywhere. Will you take one and pass it around? WorkCare is our company nurse. How many have not heard of WorkCare before? Quite a few of you. Work care, if we medical treatment, we can't just go to the ER. We can't just go to the occupational clinic to get them to get them treatment, unless it's, of course, a 911 issue. So if somebody suffers, I don't know, a routine knee injury, maybe they cut themselves with a pair of scissors, and it's not life-threatening, we need to call work care first. We have to call them, and maybe we'll text them a picture. Maybe we'll email them a picture. But you'll have an opportunity to speak with a doctor. Why do we do that? It's not about restricting care. It's about providing the right care by the right person in the right setting in the right time. If you look at and think about somebody falls off a ladder, they hit their head, maybe they're not coherent anymore, they're bleeding out of a pretty serious head wound, that's probably not a time for work care. But if you think about then, to contrast that, someone suffers, I don't know, a cut with scissors. It's bleeding, but with pressure you can control the bleeding. It's going to hurt, I'm sure of it. That's probably not a 911 worthy call. That's probably a work care call. And maybe in the end, maybe we'll have to send you to the clinic. But let's give work care an opportunity. Why do we have work care? I mentioned by the right person, right setting, right place, and right time. If we don't need to give you a prescription medication, it's not medically warranted, why pay for it? Someone's going to have to ultimately make an extra sale or 7 to ultimately pay for it. That's the definition really of a recordable injury. The faster we can get medical attention to you, the better. If you feel like you need medical attention, work care would be the place to clearly get to your supervisor. Following that, you would call work care.
Oh,
Yes,
so supervisor calls or is it an employee call?
both.
And then, so if we call, does that report it back to like your department had a injury?
Correct.
It's reported.
Correct. And why? It's not to ultimately keep a list of here's all the people who did some
Right.
bad things. It is ultimately for us is we're trying to learn.
Right.
What can we learn from an injury that happened? How do we really spread the word? So as I mentioned, slip, trip, and fall, we probably come up with a myriad of reasons. I talked about drawers open. I talked about mats that get rolled up. Ice cubes in the kitchen is probably the biggest thing. I probably cleaned up ice cubes the last 2 days a couple of times each day. And so I encourage you to pitch in. You walk in the kitchen, you see an ice cube that's either there or it's now a puddle of water, just take a paper towel and clean it up. Or go tell somebody is the first. So let's go through a few to recognize hazards. So John was the guinea pig here in this picture, went out to everybody, staged a few pictures. So if you look at the picture, how many of us have done that? Clearly we're an open cubicle office, but if you look, you set your backpack down. Or maybe you unpack a box, you set the box down. The box goes right in the pathway. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you then stop what you're doing, you go back to an email or a phone call, what have you, you got to hurry up and get up, well, you go head over heels over the backpack. It could easily have been avoided. We would maybe put the backpack on the desk or behind you or under the desk really to get it out of the way. And it doesn't just have to be a backpack. It could be a box, it could be an extension cord, it could be a phone cable, it could be a power cord, I mean, you name it. There's hundreds of things. The principle is pathways should be clear and really kept clear. Talked a little bit about ice on the floor. Clearly a staged picture, but often it happens. And by no fault of anybody, hey, it bounces out of the tray, it bounces out of your cup. You may move your cup and some water sloshes out or ice cube or two falls out. Take the time to do it. Why? Well, the more important thing is you're going to know it's there, so you're going to be able to avoid it. But it's that individual coming in who maybe might be distracted on their phone, maybe might be talking to a colleague, maybe not have their eyes fully on path. This is pretty common, probably one of the most common things that happen here at Mobile Mini. And so I encourage you, you see one of these, push it in. Just have that individual commitment where it's there. How many of you have done this? Given a box with a pair of scissors. We've all done it. We've all done it. So if you need a safety knife, come talk to me. There's a couple in the mailroom. IT has about 20 of them. I have a couple at my desk. If you need a safety knife, come talk to me. Scissors is not the right tool to open a box. They literally make a knife that it is physically impossible to cut yourself. It works wonders on opening boxes. That probably is a good opportunity for all of us. So as far as hazard recognition, that's certainly not all of the hazards that got Mobile Mini, but probably the 3 or 4 biggest. Maybe the only one I didn't touch on was probably stairs. While they're not necessarily a hazard in and of itself, but the handrail's there for a purpose. Do we all hold the handrails when we go up and down the stairs? I'm sure many of us don't. Why? Well, are both hands carrying something? We just don't feel like we want to. Another comment you get is, well, the handrail's dirty, I don't want to have to wash my hands. That's probably the biggest reason. Well, the last thing I'd want you to do is, number 1 is you can wash your hands. Number 2 is they're really there for a purpose. I promise they'll stop you if you're holding on. So why does safety matter to Mobile Mini? I think we've touched a little bit on this slide, but it's everything from our insurance rates to our ability to compete to large customers. And doing it for Mobile Mini is probably part of the reason. I want to talk a little bit about back in 1930, an individual Heinrich, obviously a long time ago, we're now approaching 100 years from that, but he did a study. And his study was that for about every 330 incidents that happen, you have kind of the one major event. And so that kind of was throughout the safety group until about the 70s, 80s, when the safety group probably got quite a bit more smart and decided that they were going to add to the triangle. And so they added various elements to the triangle. And so why we would target really the base of that triangle, why do we want to focus on reporting? Why do we want to focus on telling somebody, as you asked the question, Rose, earlier, is statistically that's going to be where we're more apt to suffer a near miss. And so if we focus on those, the idea is you really won't climb the level of that triangle. But if we look on the right side, and if our triangle is built on really a value system that I talked about earlier, you then have a number of those safety health elements that are critical to an organization. Things like training, things like opportunities like this, things like wearing your protective equipment, having an observation program that's in play. That's really the second layer. But if you look at the factors that I've circled there with red, you look at knowledge, desire, and ability. So if someone doesn't have the knowledge, that's just a little bit of training. We can train. We can give somebody some information. We can increase their knowledge. What do you do with their desire? What if they don't have the desire? Can I instill a desire in somebody? Maybe they just don't have the value system. I can try. I can coach and I can coach and I can coach. But if they don't have the desire to want to do what they're being coached on, they might not be the right team member. What if someone doesn't have the ability? Could we coach them? Could we train them? Possibly. Hopefully we can. But in the end, if they just don't have the ability to safely drive a truck or safely perform work in the yard, then they might not be the right person for that particular task. Maybe a different role is ultimately where we want to go. So why does safety matter to our customers? Again, I think we touched on this during operational excellence. So let's talk about a paradigm shift. I have some traditional mindset, and then what are maybe more relevant mindsets that really come into play. But really going from the past about focusing on kind of the recordable injuries, as I've touched on. Not having that as our main primary driver of our injuries, but rather using things like observations, using things like training sessions, using things like coaching sessions, and using our camera-based system within our trucks, using that as a real tool and really tracking that. That's really where we are shifting. We made a huge shift as of late to that organization. So think back in your career. How many times have we heard or thought, or heaven forbid, said, it's just not going to happen to me. It just won't happen to me. Or my favorite, I get all the time, this is what I hear all the time. Yeah, you're just a safety guy. You don't know what you're talking about. I would do the same way for 15 years. Or you know what? That's not going to happen to me because, he's just careless. I'm not. And again, there's hundreds of reasons that go. Again, this was so 1990. If you think about it here, kind of the traditional mindset is really what all that old school way of thinking is, you know what, Mobile Mini, they're responsible for my safety. It's probably true, there is some element, but if you think about, you know what, I am responsible for my own safety. If we aren't thinking like that, go back to your safety why that I started off in the beginning. If you're not, you don't think you have responsibility for yourself, I'd have to question kind of what your safety why might be. Think about accidents, and accidents just going to happen. It's just a fact of life here at Mobile Mini, or it's just a fact of life in industry. It's not. It's not a fact of life. The injuries that happen at Mobile Mini and in industry, hands down, 100% preventable. Absolutely. Do we feel like, or do we say or think, I got to take shortcuts to do my job? If a driver feels like they have to speed to get to a location to drop off the container, they got to speed to get there quicker so they can make their full runs in the day. Again, that was so many years ago. That is not the right mindset. Instead is, you know what, I'm not going to take shortcuts. I'm going to get there when I get there. I'm going to obey the speed limit, I'm going to obey every single traffic line, and I'm going to get there in a safe location. Some of our data that we have seen through some of these leading indicator sites, we can measure the speed of a vehicle. And we can see that, unfortunately, some of our drivers are driving well over the posted speed limit on any given road. And so, I wonder, some might still be thinking that's the mindset that some have. Instead of having this, or the responsibility being my main focus. I like this, where, you know, that's somebody else's fault. Again, that was so many years ago. But think about when we do an incident investigation, the last thing I care about is who it ultimately happened to, meaning it doesn't matter the employee's name. But recognize that every single injury we've suffered, there's a name and a face behind every one of those injuries. But for us, this is really the main focus, is for all of us to go home in the same condition in which we arrived. I talked earlier about direct costs, the direct cost of a slip, trip, and fall, or the average workers' comp cost, really in industry of about $15,000. Those are direct costs right at the top of the iceberg. But if you think about what are all the indirect costs that are suffered by Mobile Mini, we have to pay for now to make up for that particular loss. And if you recognize that all these indirect costs are substantially more than the direct costs, and oftentimes those are hidden. I can tell you here at Mobile Mini, we still have a ways to go to better track indirect costs. We track direct costs super well about injury. We publicize that every single month. In fact, part of our risk management team, they tell the branch manager, they tell the regional manager, and they tell the SVP what the direct costs are of a workers' comp or an accident. Why? Well, so the branch manager knows, and they can begin to track it. It has visibility. Ultimately, what's visible and what's tracked can start the change process. So why do these kinds of things happen? Why do we feel like we have to take shortcuts? Why do we feel like we may not have the full mindset? Look at the list on the left side. Whether it's rushing, it's frustration, it's mentally or physical exhaustion, or complacency. Those are the four, what I often deem and define as poor human work behaviors. We all do it, day in and day out. And it shifts. What makes me feel rushed is going to be different than what makes any of you feel rushed. I'm sure of it. We're all different. We just have to recognize. If you think back the last time you had a deadline, 3 o'clock, it's 2:30, you're not done. You are scrambling the last 30 minutes to finish something, to finish a project, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation, whether it's a slide deck, whether it's an Excel sheet, whether it's a report, you name it. Think about the last 30 minutes of that preparation time when you feel rushed. Are you right for making mistakes? Yeah, it's so easy to happen, whether it's transpose a simple digit, put in a wrong cell, you name it, it can easily happen. Now think about, let's put this in terms of an individual standing up on a ladder. who's using an angle grinder. Now, if they have to get that box out by 1 o'clock in the afternoon and it's 12:30, what bigger impact is rushing going to have on them to their health? For us in the office, working on a sheet, having to rush, you're going to make a mistake. It can have some drastic effects. If that ultimately gets sent to a client and it's completely wrong, that could have major impacts financially, probably not health-wise. But you take the branch employee, you can see. Anybody ever get frustrated? Never. Could that have an impact on our safety? I think it could. If you're frustrated and you're walking down the stairs, maybe a little bit more quickly, and you're not holding the handrail, you're thinking about other things. Now we're starting getting into this mental exhaustion. You can start seeing that things are going to start to add up, and all those are going to culminate in ultimately something happened. My favorite is complacency. I've been doing this way for 15 years. You're just a safety guy, you know what you're talking about. That's honestly my favorite. And that's what that is we're just too comfortable, nothing's happened, and so now luck becomes an even bigger part of the reason why we have enjoyed a safe work day. So if you see somebody, say something. Intervene. Do it kindly, do it professionally, but explain to them your safety why. Tell them why we shouldn't ultimately do that. So when we look at eyes not on task, mind not on task, line of fire, or really loss of balance, and think about the air conditions that really that plays into, that's how we're going to start noticing and start avoiding these kinds of things that happen. Because when you start adding in the states, the behavioral states, now we start adding in my eyes are not on the task, or my mind's not focused, or now I'm in a pinch point or a line of fire. Well, it's no wonder I start increasing and I have an increased risk of injury. And so as we target the states, we target the error states, hey, we're ultimately we're gonna get it. So for me, safety is personal. Safety, it is a people business. Trying to lead people to understand and get them to adopt. If you don't have the correct safety why, I can't give it to you. I can tell you mine. I can coach you why I wouldn't do it that way. But in the end, I can't give you that value. But hopefully, if you listen to these kinds of discussions, you listen and hear about those accidents that happen, hopefully that can begin to influence and change really our mindset and our way of thinking. Just to touch on here as we close in like the last 5 minutes or so, what evidence do we have that Mobile Mini is trying to build a safety culture? These are just a few of the things we're trying to do. How many have heard of the Safety Save card or the Safety Save app? For the field, we've created an app where on their phone they can literally log an observation. And we track the number of observations. And we publicize that by branch, by region, by division for North America. Why? Those are wins. That was an engagement piece in which a supervisor has had a conversation in which there was some element of safety to it. That becomes contagious. So just a few things that we do as a company. Last is the health and safety commitment statement. Can you take one? There's 2 sheets of paper per.
Okay.
And I'm going to cover each of these with each of us here the last 5 minutes, and we'll end on this. So this is a commitment statement that we came up with, I don't know, probably about a year, not quite a year ago, in an effort to maybe bring it a little bit more personal, a little bit closer to home. And so as it comes around, and I'll wait till everyone gets their copy, but ultimately, protection of people and the environment, that's a core value of Mobile Mini. So not necessarily a priority, but it's a core value. So it is about who we are. So as an employee, do you commit to promptly reporting unsafe or unsound conditions? If you see something unsafe, will you report it? I think we all shake our head yes. Well, an incident that happened just the other day happened about, 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. We didn't find out about it. The manager didn't find out about it until 6:30 that evening. So for about 8 hours, that injury continued to persist. It's really all about the golden hour. If you can get that help, or that rest, or that treatment to the individual, that's what we mean by promptly reporting injuries. If it's work-related, and it's an injury, tell your supervisor. That's the prompt reporting we're really looking for. Here's to answer your question, Rose. With your supervisor, promptly contact work care for evaluation and treatment of all work-related injuries. If you see an unsafe behavior or condition, stop, intervene, tell somebody. Speak up, don't be shy. I'm not a shy person. It's easy. If you are, you just got to do it. Just speak up. Do you as an employee commit to obeying all the applicable safety procedures that Mobile Mini has? Hopefully the answer to that is yes, and your commitment is yes. Will you as an employee assess the applicable risks to your task? We've done a lot for yard workers. We've done a lot for drivers to help them understand and be able to assess those risks. Will we commit to wearing our personal protective equipment? Clearly, we don't require protective equipment here. But what if we were to use a drill here in the office? Just because we're in an office environment, now we have potential eye injury. Now we have potential hand injury. And so you look at the IT group is probably the one group that's going to use those kinds of tools. It would be assessing the risk and wearing the protective equipment. Will we complete all of our required safety training? Every employee has to complete at least 3 training courses in halogen when they're hired, and we do a few of them on an annual basis. You commit to complying with Mobile Mini's drug-free workplace policy. Seems like a no-brainer. If you're driving a vehicle for work, you ensure everyone will wear seatbelts. I can tell you based on some of our camera footage we've received, that's not always the case. And I wonder then if complacency becomes part of what's driving that individual. And then lastly is, do you commit to complying with Mobile Mini's cell phone policy? We have a distracted driving policy, meaning we don't allow handheld cell phone use to be used. So everybody know here in Phoenix, they just adopted a new law. Handheld cell phones is now against here in the valley. And it's like that in most other major cities. Mobile Mini does allow for hands-free. Based on our camera-based footage, we are still capturing Mobile Mini drivers using a handheld cell phone while they're driving. For whether it's using a map or whatever else they might be doing. The ultimate goal is back to the safety why. What's more important than for us to arrive safe? Is it answering an email? Is it answering a text? Is it answering a phone call? And so I ask you to think about where we started. What's your safety why? How many, again, I don't want to raise a hands here, but how many of you text or surf the internet on the way home while you're driving? I'm sure we all have. I encourage you to think about what impact you might have. Maybe add that to your safety why. If you commit to each of those things, do me a favor. Just sign it, date it, and then hand it in. We'll upload it into your halogen as a formal record. And then last, for me, as I kind of close out a few things, is for us it's all about trying to instill and ensure that we as a company, we're really growing. We're increasing. Just by all of us being here, I think hopefully it's been of some value. Now, when you go back, tell somebody. Tell them one or two things you learned. Tell your family, tell your kids, tell your parents one or two things you learned today about safety, because it becomes contagious. And the more voices, the more crazy nuts we have about this, that continues to grow throughout.
I have a question. How do drivers know where to go? Like, do they have GPS in their trucks?
They do have GPS.
Oh.
Every driver has a phone. We've purchased, as a company, we purchased a cradle, a cell phone cradle for every phone. It's supposed to go in that cradle.
So they like just set their location before they get started?
Correct. While their truck is in park, in a safe location, it's in gear in park, they've been coached to hook it to the charger, put it in the cradle, program the address you need, press go. Let Siri talk to you. She'll tell you where to go. That answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah.
I have a question. Why, or maybe I'm not aware, usually company will have like a first aid box in the kitchen or any physical area. I don't recall seeing one here. And if someone has a headache or a cut, they'll go to you, like your desk.
Correct.
Why are we not putting it out?
I think part of the reason why I have it stored at my desk is I just want to make sure I'm aware that an injury happened. And so we can ultimately provide the right help, direct the individual to work care if appropriate, or provide a Band-Aid or two, whatever might be needed. That's kind of why it's there is, if we have a workplace injury, I want to know about it, because maybe there's something we as an organization can, should, or needed to be doing, so that maybe it won't happen. And so if I need to publicize it better, that it's there, I 2 or 3 people a week come up and say, hey, I need this or I need this. And honestly, most of the things here that happen, it's not related to work. It happened at home and maybe their Band-Aid got wet and now they need a new one. But to answer your question, it is at my desk. You know, we do have a safety committee here. Let me talk to them and ask them, maybe get their thoughts,
Yeah.
maybe about putting it at a central location. So,
Used
great
to get
question.
looted though, remember? They said, we fill it with, all the stuff, and then all of a sudden, 10, 15 Band-Aids would go missing so quickly, so it needs to be supervised a little bit, but,
Fair,
bandages go missing and stuff, so.
fair. But we do stock it. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, John did the inventory, and we purchased a couple of things that we needed that we were out or extremely low on. So we look at that once a month and make sure we're there. And just this most recent time, John, he got that for us. So good question.
Is there one on the 3rd floor, or is
There is not, just
There's
the
not.
one
Okay.
for the one for the building.
Okay.
But again, I want to know about workplace injuries.
Right.
If you had something that happened at home, I'm all about it. It's fine. You can have a Band-Aid. It's
Right.
not the cost of the Band-Aid. I just want to make sure that if it's a workplace injury, tell somebody. I'd like to know about it, see what we can do going forward. And
Okay.
good question. Any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So what does OSHA stand for?
They're part of the government, whether it's federal or state, and it stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Okay. When you were showing us the